So hi guys. In this lesson we're going to continue on with the rotoscoping of the Muybridge buck by having it run in a landscape in motion. So I just kind of wanted to start off by showing you my Photoshop document that has several layers that I've drawn. These are static layers. This is the sun, for instance. I have a sun layer. I created a background layer that's just really far back. As you can see, it's just a basic layer with the background being white, so that when I move that layer around, it will occlude the things behind it. I did a midground layer. You kind of notice that here. And then I did a small fence that sits between that midground layer and my buck. Then I did a front layer, front rock layer, as you can kind of see here. We'll be using that to hide the feet of the buck, and then finally the large fence that kind of duplicates the back fence there. I'm just going to have these on or off here just so you can see them. So this is the layer, the Photoshop document that we started with in class. I'm not going to save this. What I'm going to do is start Motion by opening a project and importing my buck into Motion, which is downloaded on my desktop. Buck, and you can notice that this is the video we just did. So I'm going to import this as a project. As you can kind of see, there are 8 frames here. So what I'm going to do is go to my project settings under Inspector Properties and make this a total of 20 seconds, and zoom out as we normally do, and open up our timeline so it's a full 20 seconds long. I'm going to go ahead and loop my buck while I'm at it, just like we did in the last one. Frame end condition loop and make it 240. Okay, so now we've got a buck that's running throughout our animation. We're now going to bring in some landscape. So I'm going to move my playhead to the beginning. I'm going to turn off my HUD, and I'm going to go to Import, and I'm going to find my Photoshop document, which is located right here, landscape.psd. Now, because this is a Photoshop document with layers, it'll ask me, can I import the merged layers? I don't want to merge them. I want all the layers individually. So I want this one, this one, this one, all these individual layers. So I'm just going to select all layers and hit OK. And instantly that imports the entire landscape project as a group, and inside of that group is the Photoshop group are each of these individual elements here. Now, before I start, I'm going to select landscape, and I'm going to go to the group area, and I'm going to turn off fixed resolution. That'll allow me to move things outside of this frame that I have under landscape. So that's kind of important when you import a Photoshop document. I'm then going to go to properties for this, and I'm going to notice that the scale is like 38%, and I want this at 100%. When I made this in Photoshop, the width of the file was 5,000 pixels, so there's no point in having it be smaller. So I'm going to put 100%, which will make it 5,000 pixels wide. As you can see when I zoom out here, you can see now all 5,000 pixels go all the way across my 1920 area here. And so I can actually move this entire document around. You can kind of see the sun. So everything is kind of ready for me to set up. I'm going to start just very basic by turning everything off and leave the group that the buck is in on, and I'm also going to leave the buck here. I'm going to bring the buck up to the top in front of everything so it doesn't get lost. And then my landscape will hold everything else. So the thing that's farthest back is the sun. I'm going to click on it, turn it on, and because I'm zoomed out, I can actually see that the sun is nowhere near where it needs to be. So I'm just going to move that in the frame right there. The next thing I do need is like some type of background, like a sky. I didn't draw a sky, so what I'm going to do is actually add the sky as a generator color solid. And here it is. I'm just going to call it sky, and I'm going to put it right behind the sun, being careful to drag it so that it stays inside of the landscape group. I'm going to go ahead and center this up so that it actually fills the entire screen, and I'm going to make the sky color. Actually, I'm just going to pick white, so I'm going to try to get it as close as possible, but I'm going to use my eyedropper tool and just select the white area on the buck. and now I have a white sky. As you can kind of see, because I had my playhead at the beginning, everything starts at the beginning, and we have the start of a running buck. Let's move us back here. Let's go to the back hills and turn them on. I'm going to select them, and then I'm going to move them so that they make sense within my scene. I think I want them to be somewhere around here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make it so that the hills move slightly to the left. And I do this using a behavior, as we've done in class, throw. And I'm going to open up the behavior filter for this throw, and I'm going to take the X value and make it something like -20. And now it's going to just have a slight amount of motion for the X value. Yep. Just going to see how that's. And you can kind of see there's just a slight amount of motion. I'll make it -28. And you can see very little motion. In fact, maybe that's too little. Let's make it -36, something like that. And you can see that the background, which is really far away, is just moving at a very slow speed. And you also notice that the rectangle that holds that information is not going to end. It's not going to be off screen neither when we start or end. These are the two important locations to make sure that each of your objects doesn't leave the screen. If it does, you need to do something. We'll be doing that later. All right, back hills are done. I'm going to turn on my midground, which is in front of on top of that, so that I should be able to see it. I'm going to bring it down so that I can see both this and the back hills, and you can kind of see that I'm going to start it like here, and I'm going to occlude a little bit of that background because this is going to be moving at a faster speed. It's going to actually move faster because it's closer to us. So I'm going to select the midground, go to behaviors, go to basic motion throw, open up our behaviors tab, and on the X value, instead of -36, I'm going to type -120. That's going to give us a speed that's a little bit faster. And then hit return, and then we're going to see how that looks. And you can see that by the time we get all the way to the end, it's very close to coming off screen, but not quite all the way off screen. In fact, we could even throw this a little bit more negative, so maybe make this -140. And you can see I still have more space to go. And that's going to make the background that's really far away move at a lesser speed than this foreground. But this does make it feel like that we're panning through the landscape. Now, the next thing I'm going to do, and turn that off, I'm happy with that. We're going to go through. I'm going to skip the small fences for now, and I'm going to go to the front rocks. And I'm going to turn those on. And those are going to be in front of the buck. So I'm going to move these front rocks down, and I'm going to move it all the way over so that, and move my playhead to the beginning because this is where I want it to start. So front rocks, and now the front rocks need to be in front of the buck. So the buck needs to actually be in between the front rocks and the midground. Notice I pulled it out of this group here where it was sitting before. Now it's in between, and notice now I'm actually able to hide a little bit of the hooves that we see. Now I have to introduce some motion. Now this is where it gets complex. So I'm going to select the front rocks again, and you notice that they're height-wise, it's exactly where I want it to be. And I'm going to put a throw on it, just like before. And we're going to throw it quite a bit. We're going to actually throw it -1000. That's a fairly fast speed, and you'll notice that actually looks pretty good. It looks like the ground is actually moving with the deer, but you can kind of see that right around here I run out of like real estate, right? I started way at the front, and because we're throwing it so quickly that right here at frame 42 or 40, yeah, around 42, that we're maybe 40, we're running out of stuff. So here's what I need to do. Notice that my front rock group right here has the throw in it, and it ends at the 2-second mark. I'm going to pull this edge in so that I have this throw end right there. So if this playhead goes past that, it just instantly stops. You can kind of see it goes away because there's no more image here. But here's where it gets interesting. I'm going to take this front rock group that actually throws from left to right really beautifully, and I'm going to duplicate it. So I'm going to select duplicate or Command D. Now I have two and they're overlapping, right? But I'm going to move this where the other one ends off, so they overlap slightly. So this one ends here. I'm going to show it to you. So it ends, you see it goes away, and then the next one starts exactly where this one started at the beginning. So by having it overlap slightly, what you're going to get is this continuous ground, because they start and end kind of at the same place. Of course, now it ends again, but we already know what we need to do. Command D to duplicate, scooch, Command D, scooch, Command D, scooch, Command D, scooch, until I fill up the entire timeline, and you can kind of see that it's not quite filled, but now it is. There it is. Now at this point I have all those copies here of the front rock that have been duplicated. So I have this, and this. And notice that as the playhead goes on top of them, they kind of like turn on. So this one's on for this point in time, then the next one starts, and you can't really see that happening here, which is great. To keep everything a little clean, all these individual objects here, I'm going to put them in a single group. So all the front rock copies, I'm going to select them, shift select, and then I'm just going to group them and call it front rock throw or move or whatever. This is going to be my group that I can collapse, and now we're back to a normal, easy to understand like layer palette. So we've got our buck behind the front rocks, and you can see the entire time every time it comes to an end, it starts a new copy and then does the exact same throw over and over again. And it is noticeable a little bit, but you won't notice it because there's so many other things happening in the scene. All right, let's go back to our front. Let's use that same technique for the large fence. Now, because the large fence is in front of everything, I'm going to move it down so that's right here. It moves very fast. So if I put my playhead at the beginning and I start here, I'm going to run out of something very quickly. In fact, let's go ahead and add our basic motion throw, and I'm going to say negative 3,000 is what I want for the speed. Negative 3,000. So you'll see, boom, it's over right there. In other words, it started here and it's over. Really, we will have a lot of little ones if we have this all the time, but here's the thing. I want this to come in infrequently. So I want to actually have it start off screen, show itself for a little while, go completely off screen, and at this point I don't want that fence to come in until maybe halfway through the animation. So how do I do that? Same way as I did with the other. I just bring in that fence and end it like somewhere like this. Now I have this fence object coming in with a throw. You can see the throw. And now if I want, I can take that and duplicate it, but instead of putting it right here, what I could do is put it somewhere else down the ways so that when the deer gets to that, the fence comes in again and then moves. And then I can maybe add one more here, duplicate that, so Command D, and then put that another fence here. And then it'll loop, it'll come back to this fence as our initial fence. So you can kind of see how this works. Okay. Now, because these have been duplicated, these large fences, I'm just going to select all three and right click and hit, duplicate, right click and hit group and just call this large fence so that it's, again, taking up less screen real estate. Maybe with movement, so I know. Okay, and that's in front of our rocks, which is in front of our buck. Now finally we have the small fence in the back behind the deer. I'm going to turn that on and move my playhead to somewhere where I can see it. Open this up, and you can notice that both of these were turned off. That's why I didn't see it. And notice how long this small fence group is. It's because it's actually two different images. There's one on the left and one on the right. I did this in Photoshop. I duplicated it and made it smaller. Now I'm going to actually select the entire group and I'm going to collapse it. I'm going to pretend like this is one large object. I'm going to bring this object down a little bit and put it like right here so it feels like it's behind the rocks. And I'm also going to scooch it all the way to the left, and you see I have quite a bit of real estate. Now my small fence is this guy right here. You can kind of see it right here. And it is actually the group right. I'm going to add a throw to it. And I'm going to make it the same throw about as the moving rocks, which was about -1,000. And then you'll see that that moves at a different pace than some of the other stuff. I'm going to move it down a little bit so that it actually sits behind the rocks. There we go. And you see it's kind of moving at the same speed as the rocks. Maybe it could be a little bit slower because it's behind the rocks. So once I get, again, to the end where it's still on screen but it's right about to go away, I can select that small fence object, trim it, so now it trims right there, and then do the same thing as before, but now with the entire group. So you see this is actually a lot of different things that I'm actually using. So I'm using the group itself as a thing to duplicate. So I select that, duplicate it, and then use it just like a piece of media and let it overlap. As you can kind of see, starts there. Not exactly starting in the same location as it ended, kind of started really low. Kind of not exactly working the way I'm hoping for, but it's not so bad. And then I'm going to do this 2 more times, duplicate, scooch, and then duplicate, scooch. Now if I wanted to have a break in the fence line, I could do that, right? I could let the fence come all the way off by, like for instance, if I wanted to have it come all the way off, instead of having it end, I could just have it end off screen like this, you see? And then have it start, instead of like on screen, I could start this like way over here. So again, this actually looks now like the fence behind the deer or the buck is still there. It ends and then starts here off screen to the right and continues throwing. And then it'll loop. Let's make sure we're on loop. And it'll loop back to this frame right here. So that's how we've got our multiple layers going on in motion. And at this point, you should be able to, like, if you're happy with what you got, you can move the sun if you wanted to, have clouds. And again, the order is important, everything being sandwiched correctly here. One last thing you could do if you wanted to, anything that's in motion, that's physically like a throw, you could actually incorporate something called a motion blend. So under Render, Motion Blur, you'll notice that everything that's moving now is blurry. Of course, this is kind of removes all the nice work you did for your drawing, but you could fix that in the project setting under Properties by going to the motion blur and changing this shutter angle to like 100, which is like better. You'll notice now there's blur, but it's not so bad. And then changing your samples to 16 or something like that, which gives you a higher quality. I'll maybe make the shutter angle a little bit less. And now this is what it looks like when you have that turned on like that. You can kind of see that the things that are in motion feel like they're moving, and the things that are not in motion tend to be a little more detailed. You don't have to have that. You can always turn that back off. It does take a little bit of processing power away. So when you're ready to share this, go ahead and hit share, export selection to movie, go to settings. Remember, we're doing H.264, so video codec H.264. We don't know what the source was. We're going to make sure the entire project, make sure you didn't have anything selected, otherwise this export selected layer only would be checked. You want to uncheck this. And remember, QuickTime is fine as long as H.264 is selected. We'll go to the next, and then we're going to call this finished buck, and then we're going to hit save. And then when it's done, you'll see this little button stop spinning. You'll see the entire project exported. Now obviously there are some little hiccups here because of the fence. I'll probably get rid of that small fence. Somehow it got tweaked a little bit. but that's how you add multiple layers and add motion to an existing image sequence in motion.